So, and now I want to introduce you all to my guest. He is one of the great leaders in ACT. He's the creator of MindGrapher, which I believe is going to change the world of psychology as a whole. And yeah, I really believe that because I mean, we've seen the data now and we've seen people work with it, and it's just phenomenal. He's the author of many books in ACT and probably one of the kindest and one of the smartest people you will ever meet. So, ladies and gentlemen, because we don't have any audio, please put your hands in the air to give a silent applause for the one, the only, Joe Ciarrochi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you for that welcome. Thank you for having me.
We're so honored to have you here in this webinar. The first question is, how does the future look like? Because you're in Australia, right? And it's the next day. So,
yeah, well, there hasn't been an asteroid event or any fatal cataclysmic things. I can tell you that you will be alive tomorrow because I am already in your tomorrow, and
yeah,
it's still
so
dark,
it's still there.
Yeah, we're still there. Yes.
Ukraine is still at war, and it's still shitty, and
yeah,
it's also okay.
Yeah,
so
there's a few things happening. Yeah.
Okay, so that's good to know. So that's why we have the weird time frame, and even now it's like really early for him. It's like 5:30, right, in the morning.
Yes. Yep.
So also
sun
for
hasn't
that,
yet started rising.
Also for that, thank you so much for waking up so early so we could still have a webinar on a somewhat decent time.
Yeah.
Before we really start, I really have one more really weird question. Because I've known you a little bit, and I've worked with you and with Steve, and the question that is burning on my lips for like 3 years now, and I just want to ask it in public. Did you and Steve had a bet where Steve lost, and then you got all of his hair?
No, I'm afraid not. He lost that all on his own.
Inequality between the two of you. I mean, I see you work together, and it's like really.
Yeah, and it's clear that there's a clear link between IQ and hair, so it's
right.
Awesome.
Is
he used
it negative or positive?
Yeah, it's positive. Yeah. Yes.
Positive link. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. More hair, more intelligence.
Right. That explains a lot.
Yeah. But I help keep Steve going, keep him with some ideas just in case he keeps
Maybe you stressed him out just a lot, and then he lost all his hair because of all the ideas you put in his head. Okay, so that's good to know. And can you tell, because I don't think a lot of the Dutch people know who you are. I think most Cyclix people know who you are because internationally you're like this big, one of the. I think you're one of the big five in the world. Can you, for people who don't know you, can you tell us who you are?
Certainly. Well, most people are probably coming from an acceptance and commitment therapy background. So I've worked a lot in that space and written several books. The earliest one was that one that helped to try and unify CBT and ACT, a CBT practitioner's guide to ACT. And then I've done work with Louise Hayes on ACT for adolescence and the DNAV model. And my latest book was What Makes You Stronger, which was for adults. But the reason I'm in process-based therapy and I'm doing what I'm doing is because I actually come from a lot of different camps, like positive psychology, social psychology, cognitive psychology. I've kind of moved into these different spaces, and every time I move into a space, there are totally different words and different names and different technologies, it seems. And I've just seen how fragmented psychology is, and how little we talk to each other, and how little even clinicians, ACT people, won't talk to psychodynamic people, who won't talk to narrative therapists. So I'm one of those people I just love talking to all those different camps because it's just exciting and interesting, and it's different from what I normally do. So I'd consider myself an expert in positive psychology as well as ACT and social psychology, maybe personality psychology. I kind of trying to bring all that together to imagine a psychology that was just kind of unified and could make use of the insights from all those. So that's really my driving force right now, is to kind of unify and bring things together.
That's interesting because of what I think of you. When I think of you, I think of you as a holistic thinker. Like that's what the first thing that comes to mind, like building bridges, but also looking farther than just act or PPT and just be open to
Yeah,
everything. But then,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, sorry. Go.
the second question would be how do you maintain that theoretical consistency then?
Yeah, I mean, even though every single group of psychotherapists has different words for things, different theories, when you scratch the surface, there just isn't that many different ways that people suffer. There just isn't that many different ways that people value or care or love. And so we have all these words and we're very fragmented. We don't talk to each other, but we are talking about the same group of humans who are struggling to make life right, you know? And so we use the extended evolutionary meta model, which is just a meta framework, a way of saying, here are some common words we can use to communicate with each other. And here's a common way of thinking that everybody accepts.
Yeah,
And if we can kind of have this one meeting place and call it extended evolutionary meta model, or EAM for short, where people can talk and exchange ideas, then that would be awesome. So I'd love to talk to a schema therapist. And instead of me now having to say, okay, well, that's like acceptance, that's like committed action, I
yeah,
can I can let that person preserve their way of speaking,
right,
and we have I don't insist that they speak Latin if I
yeah,
speak Latin, you know.
right.
And I
It's all
found that
about how
having
you
that
define.
common ground is, yeah.
Sorry, sorry for
Sorry, go
interrupting.
ahead.
Because it's all about how you define the behavioral processes, right?
Yeah, that's what's deep underneath, you know, what do people yearn for? What gets in the way? Um, and there are a lot of different theories that have, like ACT has for years focused on acceptance, and now we're moving into the clinging realm a bit more. It was not prohibited in ACT, but there's just things that we emphasized.
Yeah,
In the early days of ACT, we emphasized diffusion because there's so much pressure in society to have positive thoughts and think positively. So it was like an emphasis, but each emphasis means that you're seeing things more clearly, but you also have blind spots. And so other therapies don't have those blind spots. They have their own blind spots, but they're not the same as ACT. So if you could just talk to a psychodynamic therapist, you're like, wow, the way they work in the room, the way they use transference, it's amazing. You know, the way they use the actual relationship to shape behavior is brilliant. So I find it just that much more interesting. And I think, you know, probably therapists probably would love to have access to those different ways of seeing and viewing things, because it can be
yeah,
quite boring to do the same, you know, passengers on the bus exercise with a client for the 5 millionth time.
that's true. Yeah. But you're also saying the EAM, and for people who don't know what the EAM is, we can maybe explain a little bit. But you're also saying the EAM fits into all of that. Like,
Yeah.
could
It's a meta model based on evolution. So like the core principles of change. Any and every model that is evidence-based accepts evolution as as a meta theory. So we can use that. And we know that if a client comes to see you, right, they are stuck usually. They're not changing in a positive way. So evolution is the theory of change. It's not just about genetics, about epigenetics. It's about, you know, social and even language change. And so when a client comes to you, one of the first things you often have to do is get them to do something different. And that's the variation component of evolution, right?
yeah,
And then when they do something different, they need to notice, does that improve my life?
mm,
That's the selection component. Now, usually in evolution, selection's talked about in terms of survival, but here we're talking about selection as in, does it make you more alive? Does it make you more vital? And I'm going towards this idea of not just well-being, but aliveness. I think this is a key thing that everybody wants. And then, okay, yes, this new thing I'm doing uh, is making my life more vital and alive. Now, what do we do to help you retain it? So evolution has retention in it. Like, how do we turn it into a habit? How do we do homework, or depending on your model, how do we practices to make it a regular thing, or make deep changes in your life so that you retain the new things that you've done. So variation, selection, retention are at the heart of all change processes. No matter what psychotherapy you have, you can find those principles. And then when you talk to people, you're like, well, how are you getting them? Okay, so like a psychodynamic person, so there are these early childhood experiences, and they're kind of stuck in this destructive pattern. So there's a lack of variation. What do you do to help them change, to get them doing something new? And then how do you help them to notice that that new pattern is better? Then how do you help them not to backslide into old patterns? So you can ask those questions of any therapy.
Yeah, but it does come down to behavior, though, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The deeper structure is, yeah, kind of like that functional assessment of behavior, where the behavior is things you're doing that create aliveness and meaning.
Yeah. And how does something like cognitive techniques, or people are looking for insights in therapy, how does that fit into the EAM then?
Yeah. I mean, I'm only talking about variation, selection, retention. There's also all the kind of different processes that you can target across all therapies. There's like, cognition, emotion, motivation, self, overt behavior, attention, which is like mindfulness.
Yeah.
So there's a limited number of processes, and then it's multi-level.
Yeah.
So considering biology, like how much stress are you carrying in your body? Do you carry some trauma in your body? Those kinds of things. How's your diet? How's your sleep? And then there's the social level. So this is the highest level. Do you have strong social support? Do you have people there that will listen to you and care for you? And so the model's attempting to consider all those dimensions at once, the full human being in context.
Yeah.
So just as an example of why that's important, we have a study that shows that, it's obviously really important for people to have social connection. So a lot of therapies push for people to learn how to engage in positive reappraisal of things, right? So that's like thinking of things in a more positive light, reframing in a more positive, encouraging light. So you're trying to talk to yourself in a positive, encouraging way. Well, we have a study that shows that if you have really strong social connections where there's actually an external voice that's helping you to reappraise and be positive, then the actual positive reappraisal strategy you don't need it. It doesn't work for you. It's not that useful because basically those people have social resources.
Right.
So it's an example of that social environment providing that same thing that cognitive therapy has been attempting to provide. So suddenly you have two different routes to helping somebody. You could teach them to coach themselves, or you could help them build social connection, and then that supportive network would help coach them in a sense.
Yeah. And that's also the difficult part, right? Because what works for one person doesn't work for another because the context is different.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something that clinicians have known all along.
Yeah.
So academia has given clinicians a story that people can be diagnosed, that depressed people are similar, that anxious people are similar, that if you give them a diagnosis, ADHD people are similar in some deep way. Yeah. And then you get a protocol for that disease. So it's the protocol for disease model. And I think the big revolution that's happening in psychology now is we are blowing up the DSM. There are clearly these diseases, spending all that time diagnosing somebody with a DSM disorder doesn't give you much information about what to do with that client. So therapist ends up doing all that work and it gives them some information, but then they end up having to use their clinical intuitions and do these other things to kind of actually understand how to help the person. So in that way, I think academia has fallen down in that we haven't helped the therapist to identify the personal, individual needs and challenges in our measures. We just say everybody should get self-compassion, everybody should get mindfulness, everybody needs acceptance. Those are like good things, like active ingredients for everybody. When we know that, as a therapist, that's not true.
Yeah.
So the big thing we're finding, like in the last 3 years, is that it's clear that, like, for example, knowing that on average mindfulness is beneficial to people, doesn't tell you much about a lot of people, because for a lot of people, when they're more mindful, it doesn't have a benefit, and sometimes it even has got some negative association, like
Yeah.
they're getting sadder, and so your approach with that person would be different. I'm not
Yeah.
saying mindfulness isn't a useful active process, but I'm saying that you wouldn't want to, just give everybody mindfulness. Like, you want to know, how is it functioning in their life? Because almost every process you can think of can have negative effects with some people in some contexts. So we've got now 4 or 5 or 6 papers now showing this, that breaking down this idea that if on average, self-compassionate people are happier, we make the conclusion in psychology, therefore everybody should be taught self-compassion. Turns out that may not be the most important process to focus on for a particular individual. Everybody should be taught mindfulness or acceptance. That turns out not to be true. It looks like for people, there's different things that are important right now in their life, and it may not be that.
I mean, dude, take us through your head here, because this is such an elaborate way of thinking. Like, I need something that is holistic, that I can
Yeah,
do with every therapeutic form, which gives me
yeah,
an individual profile for what is the best process for this person in this particular context.
yeah.
In this, how did you, how?
Well, look, I think it is academia trying to do a better service to clinicians. I think clinicians already do this in templating. So if you have a meeting with your supervisor, right, you talk about different kinds of clients, or people present different kinds of clients, and everybody in the room learns from that client. Even though that client is idiosyncratic and interesting and unusual, there are common themes. So the client retains their diversity and unusualness, while also retaining something universal and human that you can learn from. And I just think our measurement approaches haven't done that.
Mhm.
You're extroverted, that we keep trying to simplify people into these very simple categories. You need more self-compassion. Now, if you go, mindfulness has become such a big thing that now if you go to a doctor, they'll say, do some mindfulness. So just like, it's a pill now. It's just like the Buddha pill, handed out to everybody. And so this is a mistake. Then people get turned off mindfulness. They get pissed off. They hate mindfulness. There's definitely people who have bad effects to mindfulness.
Yeah.
I heard of a case where somebody went to a mindfulness retreat and they came back and they were so focused on enlightenment that they neglected their family and became pretty
Right.
self-absorbed.
Narcissistic.
Yeah, so there are examples of, it seems to be mostly husbands in this case. We've done studies with husbands and wives and self-compassion. So these are male-female couples.
All right.
And if the husband is high in self-compassion, which is usually a good thing, right? So if
Yeah.
you're self-compassionate, it's usually a good thing because you're kinder, you're more caring towards yourself and others, you're more forgiving, you're more tolerant. There's a whole bunch of positive
Yeah.
features of it, right? So you think, okay, here's a good thing we should teach couples. Everybody should learn how to be self-compassionate, because then there'll be more other compassionate. But it turns out, for some couples, self-compassion doesn't seem to be very central. But for male partners, so far, this is what we found. If they have self-compassion, but it doesn't have some other compassion in it, or doesn't have that conscientious motive to work on the relationship,
Yeah.
then it actually looks like it's negative for the relationship. So by this, I mean the kind of self-compassion that looks like me going off to the pub to care for myself and leaving my family and, letting them do everything. That could be self-compassion,
Yeah,
right?
right. Yeah.
But it could be neglecting important things in my family. So it's self-compassion. Even that is not inherently a universal good.
Yeah. Well, that's a big step, right? From going to, okay, we have this big data and they say like, okay, self-compassion is good, so it's good for everybody, but it's not. So there's no one size fits all. That's the
That's
story here,
right.
right? There's no one size
Yeah.
fits all. There's not going to be a new one size fits all. It's not going
No.
to be. sorry, pharmacists and everybody who wants to make an
Yeah,
easy buck out of this. That's not
yeah,
going to happen. But there is a system in which everybody can find their own
yeah,
relevant process and their relevant
yeah,
plan is,
yeah,
for example. So
yeah,
um, before we get into that, maybe because there are a lot of people here, I think, who don't really know what the EAM is. Maybe I could. Uh, uh, oh, somebody's sharing a screen. I think that's not really. Somebody's sharing a screen. Yeah. Okay. Um, not anymore. Okay. So maybe for the because I always say, and I don't think I'm giving the EAM enough credit when I say it, but to make it really simple, it's like the ACT processes plus functional analysis. I think it's like a combination of those
yeah,
things to make it like really simple because I always thought like that, but I never had a model like that because I
yeah.
was really
It,
contextually raised.
yeah,
So
it's a little bit, it allows you to expand a little bit though. So an ACT, there's nothing about ACT and relational frame theory, the language underpinning ACT that would limit you from doing this. But it's like, for example, acceptance is a big piece. And for many years, when I was first in, I was here when ACT kind of was starting up, and it was always you look for what the person is avoiding. So that's an affective process. What is the emotional avoidance? Um, and so like that's in the original book. There's nothing about non-attachment in the original book.
right.
And a lot of textbooks, they might mention it, but it doesn't mean that that's been a focus or an emphasis. So now you have this, when you say, well, that's an example of an affective process, and here are some other ones. For
Yeah.
example, there is direct emotion regulation. Like ACT people would in the first years of ACT, we were allergic to the idea that you'd actually want to soothe and control your feelings to some extent in some contexts in the right situation, but that's a valid process, progressive muscle relaxation and things that directly downregulate affect. And then there's non-attachment, there's clinging to people, there's clinging to an idea about yourself, there's clinging to ego. And so all that mixes with the self process as well. So yes, you have the 6 ACT processes. So anybody who does ACT will recognize all the dimensions I said. But the awesome thing is, okay, with self, now we're like, okay, I have self as content, self as process, self as context. Awesome. But now what about I want to expand to ideas of no separate self and the interconnected self. And, it kind of lets you build on what you already know and extend. So that's the thing. It's been the strangest experience for me in this process-based approach. I keep saying we want to recognize diversity and help people expand their repertoires. And then people keep saying, oh, but you're trying to make me do something different and replace what I'm doing. It's exact opposite. It's about expanding and helping you to kind of even do more of what you do, that it doesn't replace what you do. It's not an alternative therapy. It is a way of expanding seamlessly. So if you want to use like ideas in schema therapy, as long as it's consistent with your theory of suffering and your philosophy and your ACT approach, you could use, ideas about the adult schema versus the, your temper tantruming. Now this is a different kind of,
Yeah.
Way that you're getting your social needs met, and talk, that way.
And it has to be science-based though, right? And I mean, how do
Yeah.
you avoid this becoming like a big thing where everybody just does what he thinks works instead of what he knows works?
Well, we need to be able to measure processes, right? There's cognition, motivation, all those processes that roughly match to the hexaflex of self, valued action, value clarification. Hopefully I remember all these, acceptance, we need to be able to measure each of those dimensions separately. So this is another big, breakthrough that psychological flexibility, as you guys know, is not a single thing, but you can think of it psychological flexibility. So everybody here is pretty much ACT, aren't they, Heis? So okay,
Yep.
so, that ability to contact the present moment, stay open and persist or change in valued behavior depending on what's needed. Um, Instead of thinking that as a single dimension, you could think of that as like an emergent process that comes from the set of psychological flexibility processes of being able to be accepting, being able to commit to action, being able to step back from dysfunctional aspects of self. So these are all different processes. And when those processes work together well, you get psychological flexibility. So psychological flexibility isn't a thing. It emerges from those
Right.
processes, right?
That's right.
So different therapies target those processes too.
Yeah.
So you could, maybe a psychodynamic version of helping people to experience and accept their feelings, to let go of self stories, to kind of have this insight of, wow, I was doing this overt behavior because that's how I got my needs met as a kid. And now I don't have to do that anymore. So that's insight, right? But now in the EAM, you're thinking, okay, so this is about trying to get variation around that typical social pattern. So now I can talk, now I'm as an ACT practitioner, I can talk to a psychodynamic person. Say, okay, there's the process. And then get to the question you're talking about, well, it's not just making up a bunch of things. We know that psychodynamics, evidence-based schemas got evidence, all these things have evidence. There's DBT, ACT. We measure the processes
Yeah.
with something like MindGrapher, and then there is that comment. So whatever you're targeting, if you're increasing acceptance, then you can say that's an active ingredient that you're putting into therapy.
Yeah.
But
Ingredient,
you do
right?
something radically different. Maybe you have like groups where you have drum circles.
Yeah.
Right? That I'm not saying that as a joke. I actually would like to do something like that. But I'm afraid because it's not in the protocol, right? I want
Yeah.
like music, art, and drum circles and craziness in the room. I work with adolescents, so, but even with adults, how do I know I'm not just making up some crazy stuff? Well, we got to measure the processes. Do people, when you do that, start to do something new in relation to acceptance or self or whatever it is you feel like you're targeting, and do those changes amount to benefits in their life? So as long as we're measuring processes, we have a clear theory of suffering and why what we do, whether it's schema, psychodynamic, ACT, I think we'll be okay. Otherwise, everybody gets trained in clinical psychology, and the moment they leave the room, that the university setting, they suddenly get an 18-year-old person whose father died, who has testicular cancer, who's really suffering and is unusual, and like nothing applies.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, a lot of the a lot of the randomized controlled trials in clinical research excludes a lot of unusual people
Yeah. That's true.
deliberately.
Yeah.
So we don't know, you know what I mean? But that's what every person coming through your door is unusual.
So maybe to sum it up for our audience, the EAM is like a broadened vision, you could say, on processes, and so you can define them broader than just acceptance from ACT. It's more like emotional flexibility and cognitive flexibility, but you will
Yeah.
see those ACT processes in the EAM, and it
Yeah.
completes it, I think, and that's where functional analysis, to my opinion, comes in, because of the contextual things we integrate as
Yeah.
well. With the sociocultural things and the biophysiological. I just found out I had a bacteria which probably caused like severe depression and everything. I didn't really have it,
Yeah.
but I felt it.
Absolutely.
I felt
Yeah.
it like
Yeah.
I had to pull on my mood and everything, and do everything like
Yeah.
with double energy. And
Yeah.
there's just a biophysiological factor that really, I could have been
Yeah.
depressed and went to a doctor and went to a psychologist when it was just a bacteria, right?
Yeah. And people would have never asked that question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I really think we need a 360 assessment of people, where we're looking at them biologically, we're looking at them psychologically, we're looking at their social world.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, if there are things like that should be targeted way before you start to get a psychiatrist handing you Prozac or suggesting these strategies that, like, if there's a physical cause, you'd want to sort that out. If the person's not exercising, they have a horrific diet where they're almost like diabetic, and so their energy's up and down all over the place. They're eating a lot of, processed sugars. Like, that might be the place to start.
could be that simple, right?
Yeah, or let's say they're in the social level, they're in a really toxic relationship, and a bad marriage changes you. You
Yeah.
think you're independent and you can just kind of wall that off and that abusiveness and that negative energy, but we carry those audiences with us. And if your audience, if your social audience is an abusive person, like you cannot just choose to separate yourself from it. That stuff affects you.
Yeah.
And really, one of the best things you can do is remove yourself. So maybe that's what, rather than teaching them to reappraise or diffuse, maybe it is about focusing on them redoing their social world and getting out of that. That's the variation you want to focus on.
So cool. And you're saying MindGrapher is like a way to measure, and people have to be open to, if they want to try new things, they have to be open to measure them as well, right? Because otherwise it's going to be.
Yeah. I mean, the hard part, this is another thing I'm seeing. Like, so you have that 1 hour of therapy, right? And then there's 167 hours in the week. And
Yeah.
then there's 1 hour where you see the client.
Yeah.
And there you got to hope the client remembers everything. Like the small things that were really beautiful, they won't remember those things. We don't remember any of these things. Just to prove it, look at your Facebook feed for last year and see how many things you forgot, that were really wonderful and awesome, or your social media feed. So I'm starting to see, like, we have something called experience sampling, which is what MindGrapher does. And that is where you kind of ask people questions while they're experiencing their life, not just in the therapy session. And it turns out the things that they report outside of session, they often don't bring into session, don't remember, don't recall. When you're talking to them in session, everything's retrospective, but they don't necessarily have access to everything. They can't necessarily tell you a lot because they've just forgotten. And you tend to remember the really big things and not all the little things that were really important. So there's been this blind spot, 1 hour per week and 167 hours outside of that. That we've kind of been missing. So I think the future of psychotherapy, I know that a lot of therapists don't like this because they are beautiful people who are warm and want to connect with humans. And I'm not saying that that's going to be lost, but we're going to need to have better analytic support for clinicians to be able to give you all this information about, like, your gut biome, like that kind of thing, heart rate variability, your levels of stress. When are you getting stressed physiologically? What times of the day? How much are you exercising? What are you eating? Like, we're going to need to create systems that make it easy for clinicians to use all that multi-level data. Because right now, it would be overwhelming. Systems that
Sorry to
go
interrupt,
into.
but you're saying so many important things here. You need live data. That's what you're saying, right? And
Yeah.
you cannot trust everything the client says in the session because they forgot like 80% of what happened in that week.
Yeah, like the measures of, like, just as an example, the measures of, like, if you ask people retrospectively how much positive or negative affect did you have in the week, that doesn't correlate very highly with if you ask them when it's happening, how much they had. Like, that's just an example. Like, I'm starting to see these real limitations in retrospective stuff, and so we need to get out of the session, but we need to make it so. My wife is a full-time therapist, and so I know how hard it is, how much work there is, how little time you have. So our responsibility in MindGrapher and PsychFlex is to make this really easy. So to make the clinician's job better and easier, that to me is the first principle. Like, if you're going to make it harder, you might as well just, you're going to lose that battle. So we're doing a lot of work. Steve and IBH have funded a PhD student to actually work with clinicians, find out what their sticking points are for using feedback, how to best help them. So we're trying to figure out, how do they want to use it? Where do they want to use it? We know you have to write letters. We know you have to see clients, and it's one client after the next and you're exhausted. So how can we make this so that it actually makes your therapy sessions easier, more effective, and better? And for me, that's priority one. So I've even pitched a grant, which is focused not on clients, but on therapists. Like, what do we do to keep therapists vital and engaged and alive? So I think all these systems like PsychFlex and MindGrapher need to improve the life of the clinician first, and then it will help the client just by, making the clinician's life more interesting, making the clinician, helping the clinician to avoid burnout, try new things, stay excited. Research shows that that helps the client,
Right.
paradoxically. Yeah.
Yeah, we're working really hard because it's I think MindGrapher is still a little bit in beta, right? User-friendly
Mm.
wise, especially. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's on the app and the Cyclex and the Anchorite app as well. So you can check it out. It's in the training and in the e-learning, and it's got tutorials and everything, so you can look that up and maybe start using it. And it's already, I don't know if you know, we had a high performance webinar last week. Did you hear about it? Because the guys who are doing that are like MindGrapher hooligans, and they said, well, we're actually discovering things which we would never have discovered without
Yeah.
Minecraft. And they found out they play with golfers, and they do therapy with them. And they found out that one golfer was really lacking uh, on the field because he had an exam at school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so instead of working on the field, they worked on the exam and how
Yeah.
the stress related to the exam. And then he won a
Yeah.
tournament. And
Yeah.
he would never have found that out, uh, wasn't
Yeah.
it for MindGrapher? So
Yeah. So it's like a way of doing functional assessment, but in the moment, isn't it? It's like, okay,
yeah,
what's happening, what's triggering this? And there's just so much people can remember, but
even
you can make those kind of
the
connections.
client themselves don't know. They find it out. Oh yeah, that's right. Oh right,
Yeah.
wow. I mean, I made a
Yeah.
plan like a couple of months ago, my own plan. We have plan, and you can use plan. You can make your own network. And even seeing the network for me is the exercise itself, because you look at your own process from another perspective.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's so awesome.
Yeah.
When Steve told me about MindGrapher and about you like 3 years ago, I didn't sleep for 2 days, I think.
Yeah.
Because I heard about it and I thought, okay, if half of this is true,
Yeah.
if 50% of this is true, then it's gonna change the whole world of psychology.
Yeah.
And
And it has to happen. The data now is just, so what that allows you to do when you get into people's lives is just what you said, like do that functional assessment. So for this person, it is the test that's disrupting, but that's not true for all golfers, why they keep shanking the ball, so this has to happen because right now we are showing again and again that the norm-based system and the kind of information you get from that 1 hour session isn't going to be enough. So we're blowing that up. So the science is ahead of the application. You guys at PsychFlex are way ahead of the game because obviously PsychFlex has this advantage of being able to personalize, right? You can send some material to some clients, but not others. So right off the bat, that's what you need to personalize. You need to be able to selectively deliver different ingredients to different people. So that is going to be the future of clinical psych. Because I'm like the parakeet in the mines. I see the data. There's just no doubt in my mind
yeah,
that you can't just deliver the same protocol to people. And I bet you nobody in this room does that unless they're working for, an organization that requires it.
yeah. So what you're saying is that the average data don't apply to the individual, right? That's really important.
Yeah.
And the data in
Yeah.
therapy isn't reliable enough.
Well, if you tell me, like just in the personality there, extroverts tend to be happier. There's lots of problems with that conclusion, but it suggests that everybody should be an extrovert. We live in the, TikTok generation where all successful people look like they're supposed to be outgoing and extroverted. But if you look at the behavior of being, like for example, assertiveness is an aspect of extroversion, right?
Yeah.
We look within person at assertiveness. So when people are assertive, do they feel more or less lonely? Is this helping their social relationships? And it's a variable that we call equisyncratic. It's a word that we've made up, but it means basically that it has no net positive average benefit being assertive. So but for half the sample, being assertive was increasing their loneliness because probably they're asserting themselves in relationships that are difficult and problematic.
Wow.
And for the other half, being assertive was improving their relationship. So assertiveness had no main effect. But the way that they make it sound is like, yeah, be assertive and outgoing, and this will make you happy. And so that's the average effect. But when you look at individuals, assertiveness doesn't work that way. So that's just a really clear example of averages being misleading, that we don't want everybody to look like that outgoing, assertive TikTok person. That's not the model of all humans.
Right.
And so when we have averages, we're always, comparing ourselves. Are we normal? How much do I deviate from the norm? Those norms do a really poor job of describing people, it turns out.
Right. So if I am a simple clinician, but if I just want to use MindGrapher and I'm intrigued now. So I'm listening to this webinar and I'm intrigued. I think it's still difficult. I think it's still complex.
Yeah.
What can you tell me as a simple clinician, what does MindGrapher bring to my practice? Why should I take the time and the effort to really get
Yeah. Well, you can start small. So MindGrapher, there's the app that's associated with Cytox, and that basically allows you to collect information on people's clients day to day. So right now, for example, we're using MindGrapher to collect meaning in life stuff. So we're asking people about meaning in life, and then the PBAT, which is just a bunch of clinically relevant behaviors, and we're trying to see what drives daily meaning in life. And I thought this would be a hard sell to clients. I didn't think that they'd want to do it, but my goodness, lots want to do it and are doing it very eagerly. And so if you collect day-to-day information like that, if your client's willing to do that, you don't have to force them. Some are going to want to know. Then what it would allow you to do is to say at the end of a couple of weeks, say after a wait list, you know what, these three things are really important to you.
Right.
Can we talk about those things? Why is it that having a challenge seems to be so important in driving your well-being? Or for others, it might be like you're doing something to hurt your connection. On days when you report that, your well-being is going way down. Could we talk about that? Or it might be you say you're helping your health on these days, and I notice that you have really big boost. So each of those things I'm saying doesn't apply to everybody. It'll apply to some people. You're saying like you're persisting on things that have worked in the past, but I notice on days when you do that, it's normally like a positive thing, but it looks like it's a negative thing for you. What happened on Tuesday when you did that? What were you
Right.
doing? So it very much is intended to direct and allow you to prioritize your questions. So it doesn't provide answers, but it just helps the therapist, I think, to ask interesting questions. And when it works ideally, it's bringing all this interesting stuff into the therapy and saving the therapist maybe time to talk, so they can generate interesting conversations that are totally relevant to the client. Helps the client to feel heard and listened to. So that's the idea. So that you wouldn't have to do it with every client or force them or make it a necessity, but if somebody was interested, they could, complete it for a couple weeks, and then you could get some really interesting information about what you might prioritize in therapy.
And what I like so much is that it invites us old and new therapists, but especially the old, I think, to become more curious again. Like really
Yeah.
become curious to the individual and really not depend on protocols because they're like pretty simple, right? Okay, you've got that
Yeah.
diagnosis. I'm gonna do no for every individual. I'm just gonna try to find the right questions because I think what like you
Yeah.
said, like MindGrapher is not about giving the answers, but giving the right questions. And
Yes,
then
exactly.
how you can target those relevant processes. And if you do that, the client will, I think it's a, a real benefit to the therapeutic relationship as well, the way I use
Yeah.
it, because the client is like, holy shit, this is really a specific question for me. It really feels for
Yeah.
clients like you're really doing it for them and really
Yeah,
asking personal.
exactly.
You're really
Yeah,
getting into their lives instead of the complaints we all have.
yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Um, so how is Plan connected to this? Could you tell us a little bit about, because
Yeah,
that's an application you can use as well in the app. You can
yeah,
click on the link and it's updated like almost weekly when
yeah. I've got a new one coming that's going to be really fun, which just lets them ask questions and it builds the network for them. Okay, so the MindGrapher, a lot part of it is that like, okay, maybe on the wait list when you're waiting to get into therapy, you complete this and it's like a daily diary. A couple times a day for a minute, you complete some stuff. And hopefully we'll be adding physiological stuff to that eventually and social stuff. But we also want to be able to have measures that are like more like one-offs. So there's now a newly implemented intake form, which I'm really excited about. And that's like everybody has to do an intake form.
yeah,
But this intake form is quite practical in that instead of trying to give them a diagnosis, which you probably have to do anyway, but it has a set of problems that maybe don't always fall in a diagnostic category that the client can kind of identify and say, yeah, this is a problem for me. You know, I have tinnitus, I have ringing in my ears, I have headaches, I have a sleep problem, I have sexual problem, you know. So there's all these things that the client gets to pick. And then they can, of course, enter something themselves. So it's a very much more idiographic, we call it, more individual instead of diagnosis, like what do you want to work on? And then it surveys the different processes. You know, what do you think is affecting that problem? And it'll talk about attention, motivation, all those things. So you get off a one-off picture from MindGrapher of what it is the client most wants to work on and what they see as the cause of that, of the thing they're struggling with. And so Plan also does this, but it's just a more of a visual tool.
yeah,
So with Plan, they would say, well, look, I'm having trouble sleeping and I'm having this intense anxiety at night. Okay, so, and then it'd be like, you'd get other elements. Maybe there's something happening at work, you know, somebody's being very judgmental and trying to undermine you at work. And then there's, you know, maybe you're having trouble with rumination. And so you have all these elements.
yeah,
And all Plan lets you do is kind of look at it's like a functional assessment, but graphical fun. You're
yeah,
just trying to say, if work improved, if this person were to disappear, how much would your rumination drop, do you think?
yeah. So
And
it's like
let's say if you were to
creating,
stop ruminating, yeah, and
it's
that's a
like
link.
creating positive and negative relations, right? And then creating a network.
Yeah. You get a network to see what's driving this anxiety, and it asks you a series of counterfactual questions. The new one does, you know, if your sleep were to improve, how much would this improve?
Yeah,
If your anxiety improve, how much would your sleep improve? And so you kind of can get this. You're doing just a structured version of a functional assessment where you get a pretty picture at the end, where you can kind of look at a network of relations, and you can click on a node, and it says, if you click on it, how much does that influence everything downstream?
yeah,
So there's some things which it turns out they're more like consequences, not the causes of the problems. Like it's like they come in and think you really got to, you know, I have, if a client comes in with you and they say, I want to lose weight, this is the super important thing for me. I'm eating impulsively. I don't like the way I don't like that. I don't exercise. But then you do a network analysis and you realize that eating is really just an emotional response to something upstream that they're not resolving. Then maybe eating wouldn't be the thing you target, but the thing upstream. So it helps you to kind of prioritize. What would you focus on first? And you focus on the things first, maybe you would do this that has the biggest influence on that whole network of things that are happening for the client.
yeah. And it's really dynamic as well because it changes, right? Because
Yeah.
I have my own plan and I got that bacteria. And now, interesting, thing I discovered that now I have that bacteria, I have some acknowledgement of a biological factor that's benefiting my temper and my everything. And it's like, and I get less judgmental now
Yeah.
because of that. So that really
Okay.
changed. So that
Okay.
was,
So it's like awareness.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
like awareness, but also maybe it's not my fault thing, or it's not really, it's
Yeah.
also because I couldn't, because I was just attributing everything to myself, and now I have this biological factor
Yeah.
which
Okay. So was
takes
it
apart.
discomfort in the stomach? Was there like, is there
Yeah.
some body association associated with
Yeah,
it?
it's a long story, but it's a bacteria that eats up all of my dopamine. So it
Ah,
explains why
wow.
I had like pretty difficult mood swings and shit like that. And I didn't really have them because I covered them with my behavior, but it was really
Yeah.
difficult. And now that I know
Yeah.
this, it's
Wow.
like a relief of a burden because another factor comes in. And
Yeah.
I also see that with clients, like the weirdest things. Like I had a client that really ruminated like constantly, and
Yeah.
then he found out he had AIDS, HIV,
Okay.
sorry,
Yeah.
and then but then the effect was that he was ruminating less because he was
Yeah.
like, okay, life's too short,
Yeah.
let's go on a
That's
trip. So
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like you would attribute the tension in your stomach and that, well, lack of dopamine, wow, to, oh, it must be something outside. It must be my partner. It must be my job or something.
must be my
You
character,
know?
must be yeah, must be
Yeah,
me.
exactly.
Yeah,
And then it's like, oh, hold on. There's
yeah,
this biological factor happening.
yeah,
Um, yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. I think one of the big things I'm hoping for MindGrapher in the next year is to get the physiological assessments, like, you can have 24-hour
right.
measures of heart rate, stress, and that'll start to inform. I just think we're not very aware and able to retrospectively know what's going on in our lives. Like you would have never guessed that. I didn't know there was dopamine eating bacteria. My goodness. Hope I don't have that.
Yeah,
But
it's now we're getting into my story, but it's it eats away all the nutritions that cause dopamine. So yeah,
oh, I
especially
see. Yeah.
nutrition. Yeah.
Wow. That's
So,
terrible.
but I talked to Spencer Smith about it, and he said, "Well, we should really do something with those social and biological factors because this is one of those examples where you think everything is psychological, but it could be that simple
Yeah.
as just a physical thing, like a bacteria or a virus or
Yeah.
COVID or
I
yeah,
mean, you look at it like doctors focus on the physical, psychologists tend to focus on the psychological, social type people, psychodynamic tend to focus on the social. And we just need to bring that all together in a way that's not overwhelming to the clinician.
yeah, true, yeah." Uh, we're through the hour, and I wanted to talk about DNAV as well, but yeah, we don't have a
Maybe
lot of
another day.
maybe another day. There is
Yeah.
a wonderful program from this man on the app together with what's her name? Fuck, I forget. The DNAV
Um,
program together with
oh, is it Madeline Fraser
Madeline,
or?
Madeline
Yeah.
Fraser. Thank you.
Yeah.
So together with Madeline Fraser, and the program is on Act Guide as well. He gave permission for that, so thank you, my friend, that we can use
Yeah.
that and share that. Could you maybe tell us about your new book? Because you mentioned that, and there was a cool question in there as well, like uh,
Yeah. That was a book written with Louise Hayes
what makes you
and
stronger, right?
yeah, what makes you stronger?
What does
Yeah.
make you
So
stronger?
definitely not gut eating
Tell
bacteria
us.
that eat all your dopamine. Definitely that doesn't make you strong. Um, well, DNAV is it is, it is basically an ACT consistent model, but it uses the do we have time to go into this high maybe
Do we have
maybe
time,
that should
guys?
be a different
Yeah,
talk.
sure, sure.
It's a bit of a big talk. But yeah, what makes you stronger is an expression of that model for adults, and it's written for the public. So it kind of shows you how we would deliver it to clients.
Right.
And so it was like everything, all these books I've done with Louise that are lovely, very close friend of mine, very hard, very torturous, but I think in the end, we managed to kind of put down on paper how we would speak and how we would deliver the interventions in that DNAV way.
Is it available? I'm looking up. Is it available in Holland?
I hope it's been translated.
What makes you stronger?
Certainly, Your Life, Your Way, which is for teens, has been probably translated into various languages.
So what makes you stronger, people? Yeah, I can see it.
Excellent.
20 euros for bol.com at our main store, bol.com. So no reason not to buy it. Yeah. I think we have some questions, Barry. If you have time, Joe.
Sure.
Hi. There were some questions that I could answer, but I don't see. Yeah, maybe I understand this intake form will allow to link the core process that would need to be worked on. And is that correct? That case, and then to have an assessment implemented in MindGrapher, will it be available soon?
Yes, and we'll hopefully help you. They're all designed to kind of help you to, I guess, ask questions and priorities. So they work hand in hand with the clinician. They don't replace the clinician judgment or anything like that, but they hopefully prompt interesting conversations that I guess make things more efficient for you, because you can get right to the point of what seems to be important and driving the client's well-being.
Yeah, and it's going to be automated as well, right? We're going to try to make as much automated processes as well within the app, so people have less time, more results.
I think the intake form, I believe Rob from the Hulan, there is, hello Rob, is working on feedback for the intake form. So that would be something that would be pretty easy to use. You give them the feedback form and then you have it there for you. You can look at it and talk to the client about it.
Awesome. Yeah. Rob is here, so yeah.
Yes. Hi, Rob.
Rob approves this message, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
I do approve this message. Yeah. Great job, guys.
One person is one person is asking if we can give a demo of the MindGrapher tool, and I think that's a good question. I think we did that on the Cyflex site, so you can look it back in live recordings in the app. But maybe we can do it again because it's evolving, of course. And I think, guys, that we need to do that for the Egg Guide community as well, because it's in the Egg Guide already. But it's a little bit difficult if you don't know how to use it. It's a little bit difficult. So
we need the
I'd love to
translation
show
as
up.
well. I wanted to wait for the Dutch translation and then do a webinar. So a webinar on the Dutch translation of MindGrapher is coming. As soon as we do it in Dutch, then probably it's best.
I'd love to show off and demonstrate the new plan that I've been working on. I'm just getting rid of a few more bugs, but it's almost there. And that might be fun too. It wouldn't have to be a whole hour. It could be like a half hour.
You could do that.
Great.
You folks are keen to go to bed, aren't you? Is it 9? Is it 10 o'clock at night there?
10:30 actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
You still got 100 people.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's because of you,
amazing.
dude.
Dang, that time zone's
popular motherfucker.
Yeah.
Everybody's just and they're not even yawning. Can you see that? They're just like very like fit. And
that's good
laughing.
to see.
They're laughing and they're like, and I know
great.
them all. Yeah.
That's
You want to
great.
do that now? Or you want to? No, I did. That was a joke. No, we're gonna. Some of you want to do that. We're gonna.
I'll
when
do.
the new
I'm
plan
really
is-
liking the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Barry, other questions?
No, maybe last one. Both your opinion on the AI yeah, the AI, what is happening, of course, in the world, and how we look to it.
DAI. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
AI, yeah.
What about DAI, Joe?
The AI, we're using, not to speak to the bigger moral issue, but we've developed an AI for classifying processes in the EAM. So you know how, remember I talked about motivation, cognition. So what we're trying to get to with AI is to be able to take, say your client makes up a question item instead of us making it up. They make up their own. Then we can potentially use AI to classify it in terms of what process it would be, what potential aspects in PsychFlex you could focus on, like what videos are relevant. So I'm seeing AI not in that bigger moral question, which is a bigger issue, but how can it streamline and help unify us? How can it be like a Babel fish, to kind of anything your client says, maybe analyze therapy sessions and kind of make sense of it, or create your own unique questions for a client, and then it tells you what process that would focus on. So we are using it a bit now to support that unification.
Yeah. But it still speaks to the personal experience of the client, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the clients can use their own words, but the great news is that they tend to use words which will link to, mindfulness-based attention,
Right.
praise, process, awareness, motivation, but it's their own way of speaking and their own unique way of seeing that we're trying to preserve, while also capturing the deeper process underneath it.
Yeah. So AI in this context is not making shit up. It's just revealing
Yes.
things that the client doesn't see, that the therapist probably doesn't see, like
Yeah.
really discoveries like, oh my God, this is real. This is actually
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that's a whole nother hour, like attempts to replace therapists maybe, and
Yeah.
to have chat bots, and yeah. But that seems a little sad. I think I still think we need each other. I don't think that's going to go away anytime.
I hope so.
Hope we need each other.
Great. Yeah, I hope so too. So yeah, from my side, thank you, big thank to you, Joe, for doing this for the iGuide community and as well as for the PsychFlex community. So thank you from my side. I think these were the questions, guys.
Okay. Then I just want to say thank you so much for coming, and for the people who are listening, I hope you can feel how important this is. I mean, it's all new and it's all getting used to, I think. And Joe, I mean, thank you for doing this, but also thank you for creating this, man, because being part of this feels like being part of history of psychology, and I think we really got something here because of you, thanks to you.
Well, if I could just correct you on one thing, Heis,
Oh.
this is going to be one of those things where you're right, history is changing, but it's not going to be the academics by themselves. It's going to need the clinicians and the academics forming equal partnership. And then we will change it. It can't be the academics descending from the mountain and handing clinicians protocols. So we will, in the coming days with PsychFlex and MindGrapher, we really hope that people are patient and kind of willing to work with us, because you are part of the solution. And so that's what I hope. That's
really important to say. Yeah, that's why I was so glad with the webinar for the high performance people, because they were actually, if you see that, you should see the recording. They're actually doing it. And then we have those bridges now, and we hope a lot of people will follow, and I hope we can make life better for you as a clinician as well, to improve things from MindGrapher, which we're constantly doing. So thank you for all the effort again. So you're not getting away with the compliment. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I hope to see you next year. And in the meantime,
I'm coming to Holland next year, so yeah.
We'll probably have more webinars, and then next year, finally, I'm
Excellent.
I'm gonna meet you in person. Thank you so much, Joe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.